But let's begin with the panel now towards formal recognition of the Hezare genocide, and our speakers are at this end of the table. We're going to be bringing together distinguished voices from politics, academia, research and advocacy. So please welcome our panellists. Senator David Shoebridge, the Greens Foreign Affairs spokesperson, also our host for this event. Thank you so much, David. Also Emeritus Professor William Maley from the Australian National University. You're welcome to this gathering. Thanks so much for being with us. Associate Professor Cecilia Jacob from the Australian National University. Thank you so much for being with us. And Mr. John Gulzari, an author and researcher, the Secretary of the Federation of Hezare Councils of Australia, also the co-founder of a research group called Hazarology. Thank you so much for being with us. Okay, so why don't we start with you, Mr. Gulzari. A lot of your work has documented both the archival history and the lived experiences of Hezare survivors. How do those personal testimonies, those personal stories, like the ones in your family, and community memory strengthen that call for recognition that we've been hearing about this morning?
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, greeting. Well, my work is based on the historical evidence. I'm going to speak a few points on the historical evidence. As Faiz Muhammad Khatib Hazara, who is at the volume 4, is spoken about killing of 400,000 families, which equates to 2.4 million. And this work has also been translated by Professor McChesney from University in US with the MM Khurami, which recorded that as well. And this dossier submission is also submitted to the Canadian Parliament, which says, I'm just quoting, with over 60% of the Hazara population massacred, tens of thousands were sold into slavery, and forced migrations reshaped and altered our geography. Approximately 400,000 Hazara families were displaced, with 80% of them either lost their lives or become slaves. In 1890, April, May, and June, the Sheikh Ali Hazaras uprising and defeated. Hundreds of Sheikh Ali Hazaras were captured as prisoners of war, and many of them were sold as slaves. Jabri Hazaras oppressed, and June in 1890, there was 10,000 from Faulat and Sepai Hazaras rose against the heavy taxes and oppression. In November 1890, the Sheikh Ali Hazaras expanded with the thousands captured as prisoners. And 5th of November 1890, the Afghan regiment under the colonial Farhad Khan has returned from the Sheikh Ali Hazaras with the expeditions with 1,000 prisoners. This has been recorded by Viceroy of India, also reported this incident to the Secretary of State in London. Relocation of the 6,000 families to Hazarajat in July 1890. 6,000 families of the lower class living between the Dhaka and Gandamak to take up their residence in the Hazarajat and Turkestan. Decree of jihad and collection of the voluntary forces against the Uruzgan Hazaras in August 1892. The authorities proposed of the religious war aiding the Uruzgan Hazaras are not Sunnis, and they have risen in the rebellion against the ruler of Islam. It is bounden duty of every true believers to take up the arms against them. Land confiscations, according to AGG Major General James Brown, the Hazara resistance has sway all over Hazarajat. It is established that 16,000 regulars and 26,000 tribal forces have assembled, and Amir has promised to distribute the lands of Hazaras between the Afghans. And most of this document evidence is taken by the National Archive in London. Outrages of women on 7th of May 1892, the Hazara rising were due to extreme humiliation, heavy taxes imposed and outrages of Hazara women by Afghans, which is reported by Major General James Brown. Thus, excuse to pretext to the genocide. Fatwa was issued by the Khani Mullah, which is the chief mullahs, which was 38th of May 1892, which said, and I'm quoting, a book abusing 3 successors of the Prophet, having been founded in possessions of some Hazaras. The book was sent to the Khani Mullah, which is chief mullahs, in view of religious war being proclaimed against the Kafir infidels. Then Khani mullahs gave the fatwa accordingly. This was sourced from the British Archive in 30th of May 1892. On August, which I have the copy of the fatwas here with me as well, which is ready for the exhibition later on, so anybody can come and have a look. 200 copies of this fatwa has been signed and sealed by 107 sealed muftis. The issue was which issued the decree. The Hazaras are Shia infidels. It is in fact 12 lines in Persian and 20 lines in Arabic, including the Quranic text and Hadith. All the Hazaras being put to the sword on 4th of June 1892. When the combined forces arrive in Uruzgan district, reporting should be made to me, the Amir, in bracket. I will join 100,000 men with 100 guns. Uruzgan should be besieged on all sides. All the Hazaras has been put to the sword. And this is from the British Archive, 1891-92, volume V, page 110. And then I'd like to...
Thank you so much for your very thorough briefing, Mr. Ghazari. I'd just like to bring in Professor Maley now, one of Australia's leading scholars on Afghanistan. So from your perspective, listening to Mr. Ghazari and all the body of research and work, what historical evidence most strongly underpins the case for recognition, briefly?
Well, there are several different factors which come into play here, and we have both documentation about statements that were made at the time of the events of 1891-93, which exhibit a plain genocidal intent. And then we have evidence about the actions that were taken by the state at the time. And when you put the two together, it gives you a strong case for recognising that something very distinctive and very horrible happened at that particular time. We also have evidence that the ruler of Afghanistan at that time was suffering from a metabolic illness that was likely to produce extreme violent dispositions. The same illness, incidentally, that King George III of England suffered from. And on top of that, we have a great deal of oral history, which sheds light on the events of that particular time. And for those who are inclined to ridicule that kind of testimony, it's worth bearing in mind the old observation that the plural of anecdote is data. Ultimately, when we go back to trace these kind of events, we can't necessarily find out every single detail about what had happened, just as we don't know exactly how many people died in the Holocaust, nor do we know exactly how many people died in the genocide of 1891-93. At one level, it doesn't matter, because the evidence of both genocidal intent and genocidal action is strong and compelling. It's also the case that when we talk about genocide, we do sometimes run the risk of discounting the longer-term consequences which flow from the disruption of the social structures which sustain people in difficult environments. In many Western countries, people can look to the state to provide them with assistance. In poor countries, people often depend upon their family networks to survive. So when you have major disruption of those kind of networks with the kind of mass killings that took place in the 1890s, the effects are not just on the people who are directly slaughtered, but also on elderly people who can no longer rely on children to look after them in their more vulnerable stage of life. So you have knock-on effects that are often not taken properly into account when we're trying to add up the numbers, and we'll probably never know exactly what those were. Of course, there's no one left alive now who was a perpetrator in 1891-93, but there is a legacy of intergenerational trauma of which we need to take account. And of course, there are experiences of contemporary persecution of Hazaras as well. Not only Hazaras, because people who were liberals from all sorts of different backgrounds within Afghanistan are currently being viciously targeted by the Taliban. But it does not pay to be Hazara at the moment in Afghanistan. And we're seeing that playing out in numerous policy spheres. And that, of course, creates a contemporary challenge for us to look at, because this is not something from the past. It's something which is persisting into the present. And that, in a way, is why learning from the past and recognising the past is a really important aspect of responding to the challenges we now face.
Thank you, Professor Maley. Let's hear now from Associate Professor Jacob about the international law kind of overlay. What legal pathways exist internationally to support recognition and accountability for the Hazara genocide?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And I suppose it's worth bearing in mind that when we're talking about international legal pathways to accountability, we are really looking at specifically individual criminal accountability, and we're looking at state accountability for genocide. So I'll talk about those, but I think it's important that we also think about accountability and justice as much broader than just the punitive pathways, that it does speak to a wider effort towards reconciliation, which we know in Afghanistan in the present moment is, of course, quite a difficult conversation, but it is an ongoing consideration. But we are living in a particularly unique moment in international law where we are seeing quite a turn of attention to the question of genocide and international mechanisms. In particular, we have an unprecedented number of cases of genocide that have been referred to the International Court of Justice. When we talk about the International Court of Justice, we are talking about state responsibility, which makes this a complex situation if we were to consider the implications for referring a case of Hazara genocide to the ICJ, but not impossible. And this would not mean that the court would have the capacity to issue arrest warrants and to prosecute, but it would be quite a symbolic judgment. And it's also quite important to bear in mind the use of the provisional measures that have been used recently in the case of Gaza, also in Myanmar, in relation to the Rohingya population, has been not a determination that genocide has been committed, because that can take many years to prosecute. But it is the request by states for provisional measures for the protection of populations that can create both legal and political impetus to protect. You would all be aware that there's already investigations underway at the International Criminal Court in the area of war crimes and crimes against humanity, specifically war crimes against humanity for gender persecution. It is possible for states to refer the case of Hazara genocide to actually expand the remit and the focus of the ICC in this case. And I just want to draw your attention to, again, probably many of you are aware that earlier this month, on the 6th of October, the Human Rights Council actually approved the creation of an independent investigatory mechanism. This is incredibly important for both international and domestic pathways for justice outside of Afghanistan. There's only been 3 of these mechanisms to date, one relating to Syria, to crimes by Daesh and ISIS, and also in Myanmar. And so this is now going to be the 4th of its kind, and it gives opportunity to actually respond to this need for documentation. So the purpose of this mechanism is to collect, consolidate, preserve and analyse evidence of violations. So this documentation and the preservation of this evidence can be used both in a potential ICC case. It could also be used in cases of universal jurisdiction. So if there was a moment where you had international criminals passing through a jurisdiction of a state, they would have access to the materials to proceed with criminal prosecution in that case. So there are quite a number of pathways at the international level as well for domestic implementation. We can think about pathways for universal jurisdiction, sanctions and so on.
Cecilia, I'd just like to ask an extra question. Here we are having this conversation about calls for formal recognition. Has it happened anywhere else? Are there any international precedents, or would we be the first?
So there is a UK parliamentary inquiry that has, I don't think they've formally recognised the Hazara genocide, maybe others who would know, but they have actually opened a formal parliamentary inquiry that since 2022 that's ongoing. And that has been a systematic analysis that is then calling for formal recognition of genocide.
Can we describe what formal recognition would look like?
Maybe I have to pass that one to...
Yes, it could take the form, for example, of a motion passed by a legislative chamber that embodied a recognition that a particular historical episode had actually taken place. It wouldn't necessarily have to be in the form of a piece of legislation that would criminalise denial of a genocide of the sort that Germany actually does have in respect of the activities of Nazi Germany, where we've seen people prosecuted there. The Canadian Parliament has become involved in this respect. The Subcommittee on Human Rights of the House of Commons of Canada conducted an inquiry which was then aborted by the Canadian election earlier this year, but will probably resume, for which Dr. Niamatullah Ibrahimi of Melbourne University and Dr. Melissa Kirchie of the American University and I prepared a minute that was then submitted by Dr. Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch, detailing some of the circumstances. So sometimes parliamentary committees can have serious investigations of that kind, just as there was in the late 1970s a very high quality investigation by the Joint Standing Committee of Human Rights of the Australian Parliament on human rights in the Soviet Union. That particular report then became a world leading document on what was going on in the USSR at that time and what kind of things had happened in the past.
Let's hear from Senator Shoebridge. What would need to change to deliver an official Australian Parliament acknowledgement of the Hazara genocide?
Well, I think a lot of the important work is being done in moments like this, and I really want to thank Professor Maley, Professor Jacob and Mr. Gonzari for bringing the evidence into Parliament. It is the challenge when you're speaking about making a finding about genocide at a legal or even at a political level is proving that link between the appalling actions that we can all see and proving the intent. And I think, as Professor Maley made it clear, there's compelling evidence about linking intent and the actions in the late 19th century. What I find when I'm talking with colleagues and having discussions about what's happening now is the argument, well, the Taliban is just brutal to everybody. And it's a kind of indiscriminate, directed violence that happens in every direction. And you can't single out an intent against the Hazara community. Cecilia and William will be assist us in working through the legal arguments on that. But that is some of the discussion that happens when I speak. But at the end of the day, I firmly believe that we would only want to put a motion forward and present it for a vote if we felt it was going to succeed. And we do need to do more work around the Parliament to make sure we have those numbers to actually succeed on a vote. There are, as people probably know, there are two chambers in the Parliament here. I'm in the Senate. And in the Senate, there are multiple ways that you can get a resolution to be adopted in the Senate. There are really three players whose numbers matter. The government, everybody could agree. The government, the opposition and the Greens could agree, and that would be a pathway through. The other pathway through would be if the government and the Greens agreed, because there would be a majority there with the government and the Greens, or with the opposition and the Greens. So there are three different pathways to proceed. Obviously, my preferred pathway would be a consensus resolution where we persuade everybody. But that's the pathway in the Senate. That could be preceded by an inquiry. So a motion could be introduced. It could be referred off for an inquiry. The inquiry could be done by a number of different committees. That is one possibility. And then we would have the opportunity to gather evidence. And we're happy to engage and talk about that as a possibility. Of course, separate to that, we could just persuade the government as an act of the executive rather than an act of the Parliament. If the government, through the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, decided to make a declaration, that would also be a formal recognition. So there's a non-parliamentary pathway which you can go with the government. So they're the different political pathways. I think a resolution in the Senate through one of those groupings, or somehow persuading the executive, the government of the day, to pass a resolution. But I want to give you some comfort that it can seem a really hard path. But when I first got into politics, I was in a state politics in the state parliament of New South Wales in 2010. And one of the first international issues that consciously came across my desk, apart from Palestine, was actually the Armenian genocide. And the Armenian community came to a state parliament first and asked a state parliament to pass a resolution to recognise the reality of the Armenian genocide. And that took a lot of time and effort. And we came in early with that. And it really is from really non-government, non-main party politicians who brought that forward in the state parliament and ended up having a recognition of the Armenian genocide in the state parliament, which ended up being a consensus resolution. So there's a good example there that happened with the Armenian genocide. So but I do think building the evidence base, connecting acts and intent, that's the challenge right now.
Can you put some detail around possible timelines for this? Are we talking about a 5-year process, 5 more years from the community in driving this call?
I mean, I can't tell you the time frame. It would be possible to do it within this parliamentary term. So 2.5 years, that would be possible. But I couldn't give you a commitment to do it within this parliamentary term.
What would formal recognition, David Sheepridge, of the Hezare genocide mean for Australia's role as a human rights leader if it was achieved?
I think it would be Australia acting with our principles. And hopefully, and you see this in case after case. I think about when Australia led, for example, the anti-apartheid movement and was at the front of sanctions and bans. Once a country like Australia acts, you can then suddenly see a whole series of, other countries who are suddenly given the green light to act. I think it would be really important internationally.
To Cecilia and William, how much hope do you have right now that this could happen, that this could come to reality?
I think there's a very persuasive argument. I know that it's very much live internationally in the US. They have precedent of making executive decisions to recognise genocide, and there's currently a campaign for the current US administration to recognise this as genocide. And I think, as David was saying, it's very much a part of Australia's identity that we actually advocate for these matters of justice, and on a principle base, we are very strong international advocates. On this very specific case, I, as an outsider in reflecting on this, I think it's harder to make the genocide claim as it is when international law allows for recognition of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And this is where we can see some of the international politics around this, where it is it's a lower threshold or a lower bar commitment for states to run with crimes against humanity because of these questions of intent. And there's the high bar of proving genocide. I think there is definitely substantial evidence that intent and that the criteria of genocide has been met. And also the political implications of this. But this is probably, with the situation currently in Afghanistan, is probably the most likely window.
William, did you have anything to add?
Yes, I just add the observation that the atrocity forecasting project that the Australian National University has been running for some time ranks Afghanistan now as number 1 at risk in the world of a genocide or politicide in 2024 to 2026. So the situation in Afghanistan is actually an alarming one at the moment. It's not one which is being nearly as widely reported as in many other parts of the world. but it's something we need to watch. And a great deal of what is going wrong in Afghanistan at the moment is not being picked up by mainstream media. But to give you just one practical example, my former PhD student, Dr. Fahunda Akbari of Monash University in November 22, when we were having a conference at La Trobe University, received a message that her uncle and 7 other members of her family had been murdered in Daikundi. And she then documented that for Genocide Watch. But if it hadn't been that the victims happened to be related to a notable academic from Afghanistan living outside the country, their deaths would have been completely unreported. And that's a wider problem that Afghanistan faces now.
John Gulzari, speaking from the heart, what would this mean for families? Here we are in a room with generations of families, big turnout from the Hezare community across the eastern seaboard. What would recognition mean for little children like Veronica, Bashir's daughter, and others across the generations?
Yep, I think it's quite crucial because since 99, when Taliban 1.0, when I escaping the persecution in their hands, and there are hundreds languished and many died at the Yakaulang, West Kabul, and Mazar Sharif, and many other regions, which is well documented by Human Rights Watch. And it has been repeated as well as Taliban version 2, post-2022. As we can see, the victims, because Taliban says that they are not going to commit those atrocities, but it happened time and time again. As I think I would like to quote the Martin Luther King, he says, "Injustice anywhere is threat to justice everywhere." So an ethnic group such as Hazaras, I think we don't want to be killed for our race, religion, faith, caste, creed, and political inclinations. But we are law-abiding citizens of the world, and we want to live without the prejudice, discriminations, target killings. And we also believe that the peace and peaceful coexistence, we are not subscribed to notions of saying that an eye for an eye, that if atrocities has happened to us, then we're going to take that and take a revenge. But rather, I think it's good to follow the principles of as Gandhi says, an eye for an eye make the whole world blind. And I definitely don't want to live in blind kingdoms. And that's why I think at the Federation of Hazara Council of Australia, we are collaborating with so many peace-led organizations such as United for Human Rights, HWPL. I'm also personally working with Together for Humanity, UN peace-led missions, and many other peace-based organizations to promote peace, harmony, and social coexistence. That's why recognizing the Hazara genocide is utmost urgent and crucial, because we know that under the Taliban 2.0, the same atrocities that repeated in 1.0 is happening as we can note it. And as Professor William Milley says, that many of those atrocities, forced migrations of, recently there was something in the Ghazni province that they wanted to forcibly deport like 1,200 houses from the Ghazni province, which I am from. So many of those atrocities happening, and not recognizing the Hazara genocide is, I think, that the same theory of insanity, that we are repeating our mistakes time and time again. And I believe, I think, recognizing is an instrument which is to least to say that it is preventing that atrocities, I even say the word genocide, to happen again. So I think I urge the honourable member of the House and MPs to take serious considerations in putting forward a motion, and also things, an instrument that recognizes the Hazara genocide as it happened in Canadian Parliament. Also, UK Parliament is working with the Friends of Hazaras, and they are looking to put similar motions and also an instrument through Parliament to make it, to recognize Hazara genocide. And I'm hoping that Australian Parliament and the government will do it accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gulzari. I'd just like to bring in, right at the end of the table there, Dr. Ahmad, to share his thoughts, particularly on the impact for families listening into this conversation.
I have to come vote.
John, was there any help?
Yeah.
Very quickly. I'm sorry. Very short.
خب برای همه حاضرین سلام عرض میکنم.
Greeting to the honorable guest who is present here today.
بسیار تشکر از پارلمان محترم استرالیا که این فرصت فراهم کرد که ما در خدمتشان باشیم و مسائل مهم را مطرح کنیم.
I'm grateful and thankful to the Australian Parliament who has given us the opportunity to present the most crucial and important issue today.
با استفاده از وقت اجازه می‌کنید من یک مقدمه عرض کنم در مورد اساسنامه روم و محکمه ICC.
I'd like to say briefly about the Rome constitutions and about the ICC case.
خب جهان در سال 2002 با محوریت شورای اروپایی شاهد تصویب اساسنامه و محکمه ICC در مورد 4 جرایم سنگین علیه بشریت هست.
Since 2002, there's, according to ICC, there's 4 crimes which is against the human rights and human rights violation.
که کشور استرالیا یک از کشورهای فعال در تصویب این اساسنامه بوده است.
Australian government is one of the key players and instrumental in, as part of this instrument.
در این اساسنامه 4 جرم به عنوان جرایم بین‌المللی شناخته شده است. یک نسل‌کشی، جنایت علیه بشریت، جرایم جنگی و تجاوز ارضی.
So in this, there's 4 key points that's been mentioned, which is the crime against humanity, like sexual crimes and war crimes, and the sexual
violence.
و 3 تا جرم اولی یعنی نسل‌کشی، جنایت علیه بشریت، جرایم جنگی در 2 برهه تاریخی در افغانستان علیه مردم افغانستان و به خصوص ملت هزاره رخ داده است.
3 of those points has happened in case of Hazaras.
خب هدف از تصویب این اساسنامه اجرای عدالت کیفری علیه مجرمین بشری جهانی بوده است. هدف از تصویب اساسنامه اجرای عدالت جزایی علیه مجرمین بشری بوده است.
In order to accept this constitution that has been passed in Rome, it is to set against the war crime.
خب چرا؟ از نظر این اساسنامه اگر جرم نسل‌کشی در یک کشور علیه جمعیت رخ بده به این معناست که علیه همه بشریت و جرایم رخ داده است.
According to this constitution, if the crime against the ethnicity of a particular group is committed, it means that crimes against humanity has been committed.
زیرا با این جرایم وجدان همه بشریت آسیب می‌بیند و صلح جهانی و مسالمت آمیز را شدیداً به خطر می‌اندازد.
Well, according to this constitution, this war crime is going to jeopardize the peace, and also it is going to risk the humanity to suffer at large.
و همین خاطر مسئولیت همه بشریت و همه کشورهاست که برای محاکمه مجرمین و مجازات آن همه با هم همکاری کنند.
Due to these reasons, this pretext is required by humanity to take necessary actions as against this atrocity.
حالا ما 2 تا تقاضای عمده اینجا از کشور محترم استرالیا و از پارلمان داریم در همین راستا.
I have 2 requests from the Australian Parliament in this regard.
اول در سال 1891 تا 93 جرم نسل‌کشی، جنایت علیه بشریت، جرایم جنگی توسط یک نظام سلطه‌ای به نام عبدالرحمن در افغانستان رخ داده است.
War crime or genocide between 1891 to 1893 has been committed under the rule of Amir Abdurrahman.
که برخی از دوستا استفاده کردیم و برخی شواهد این مسئله اشاره کردن.
Which some of the panelists has indicated that the evidence that this atrocity and genocidal act has been happened.
حالا دو خواسته ما داریم در این قسمت اولی. اول شواهد و اسنادی که اگر نیاز باشد و صورت وفور برای اثبات چنین جنایتی امکان پذیر است و قابل ارائه.
So I have two proposals. First thing is that if the evidence is required, it can be gathered and submitted as part of our case.
خب تقاضای اول اینه که توسط کشور محترم استرالیا که در صحبت‌های برخی دوستا بودن این جنایت به صورت رسمی شناخته شود.
So this can happen as first point that based on understanding from the panelists that if it be required, it can be if it is recognized as formally in the Australian Parliament.
چرا؟ زیرا تا یک مشکل ریشه مشکل و اساسی شناخته نشود راه حل برای او پیدا نخواهد شد.
If it's not formally recognized that there cannot be a solutions based on the current situation or maybe based on atrocities.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad. Just in concluding our panel, I'd like to just hear briefly from Cecilia and William again on just the single most urgent actions now that the government, that Australia should be taking. Cecilia?
Yeah, I think in addition to moving on to recognition, I think we need to move. Recognition is important, but we need to move beyond that. We need to know that this is an urgent situation now and that we need to have a much more comprehensive and strategic approach to actually protecting populations, which we have many tools at hand.
Yeah, at March on Washington in 1963, the former rabbi of the synagogue in Berlin in the 1930s, Joachim Prinz, gave a very powerful speech, and one of the things that he said, which has always stuck with me and which applies now, is that the most dangerous, the most contemptible problem that one encounters in that kind of situation is silence. Mm-hmm. And we need to resist the temptation to fall silent in the face of the kind of challenges that genocide or the potential for genocide throw up at us. Because if we remain silent in the face of this kind of challenge, then we actually sacrifice any kind of humanity.
A big thank you to all our panellists. Why don't we give them a round of applause for their time and their insight and their leadership. Now, we've got a small video that we'd like to share with you.